are now recording. Hopefully everyone is good with that. Welcome everyone to our Impact of COVID-19 and How to Adapt webinar. This session is entitled Flipping the Online Classroom. And my name is Nicole Young. I'm the Executive Marketing Manager for Marketing and Introduction to Business. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Meredith Fossil. She and I will be monitoring the chat in the Q&A area. So please put your comments there. Everybody is muted upon entry, so we will be watching that actively and we'll reply, take breaks, and try to make sure everybody gets their questions answered. We also were joined today by our presenter, Joe Cannon. He is a master educator and a professor of marketing at Colorado State University. He is also the lead author on our Peralt Cannon McCarthy Essentials of Marketing product that we have out as well. So we are recording this session. We will be sending it out afterwards. At certain points during the session, we are going to use some polling, so watch for that. He will cue that on his slides as well as the chat area to have some interactivity going. So thank you guys so much for attending on this hopefully beautiful Friday, wherever you are. And with all that being said, Joe, I will kick it over to you.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it and appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with everyone today. I like the photograph up there. Probably it's nice that the image of me in the corner is much smaller, since the only haircut I've had for the last 3 months was a self-given one, which has given me great appreciation now for my barber, and can't wait to get back to having a barber cut my hair. Today, what I'd like to do is talk to you about active learning, passive and active learning in the online classroom. And so I've been teaching online for more than 20 years now. When I first came to Colorado State University, we did what the time was called distance education, and the online part was really more just using email. My classes, my MBA classes, were videotaped, and then we made multiple copies on VHS tapes and mailed those out to our distance learning students. And when I first came to Colorado State, I was a case teacher. I taught a lot of cases in my MBA classroom, and that's kind of an ultimate example, I think, of an active learning practice. And so I've spent a lot of time in the last 20 years trying to figure out ways to get more active learning with distance learning, or students who are actually mostly asynchronous from us. And so I'll talk about passive and active learning. Also, a few years ago, I started flipping my classrooms, and so that wasn't in the online space. That was in the face-to-face classroom, and I was assigned to classrooms. I had about 60 students in each class. They would work. I would come in and I'd talk maybe in a semi-lecture format for about 5 minutes, and I'd use the last 80 minutes of class where students would break up into small groups and work on active learning projects, and I interact with the students individually and sometimes in a group basis and stuff as well. Subsequently, we moved that to a hybrid class format where the students, instead of coming in 2 days a week for 75 minutes, I recorded a series of online video lectures. Those online video lectures have also been used in our online Introduction to Marketing course as well. And so those are all things that I've been doing kind of in this space as well. And so we're going to talk about a flipped class. We'll talk about some of the challenges, especially in this, what I'll call the pandemic-induced online classroom, which for many of you might mean that, you know, especially in this past semester, you were suddenly thrown into online. And I'm teaching online. If the first time you have to teach online, you haven't had a lot of opportunity to prepare it, it can certainly be a challenge. It's also a challenge for our students who didn't sign up for online, or many of whom did not sign up for online and stuff as well. So we'll talk about that. I'll talk about some of the tips and tricks I can offer for flipping the online classroom. We'll have some time at the end for some questions and comments. I'd like to start off by getting you all engaged a little bit here and telling me where you're from. What's your home discipline and what do you normally teach?
So hopefully you guys will see there is a polling question displayed. It looks like we've got quite a few of you finishing that. We're really not going to give you a full 5 minutes, so hopefully nobody needs that much time. If you wouldn't mind answering it there, hopefully you can do so.
Did I close it off by accidentally there?
Yep, you're good, Joe.
Okay. No, people are still coming in. I took it off my screen, so I didn't know if I accidentally stopped the poll.
You are good. Like we're about 80% populated here. So if you want to go ahead and answer the poll if you haven't done so. All right. We'll go ahead and display those answers that we have. Got 15 seconds here, it looks like, for people who are in process. Somebody's saying they cannot hear audio. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you
just fine.
Okay, great. All right, looks like we can show the poll results here. You guys seeing the results on your screen?
Yeah, what do we have here?
Yeah.
A lot of no answer, but yeah, marketing, a fair amount from management as well, and accounting. Thank you. Well, thank you for taking some time and showing us the poll there. 22 no answers, so we almost evenly between other and different ones as well. So thank you folks for letting us know where you're from. As a marketing professor, a lot of the examples I'll be giving today will be marketing examples, but they're fairly, you'll find they're fairly general. So I'm going to explain how I do this in my marketing classroom. I think you'll easily be able to make the transition to think about how you might do some of the same types of, use some of the same types of tools in your accounting class, your management class, or other classrooms. So I encourage you to do that. Let's see, there we go. Also, you know, if you can take a minute to tell us what you hope to get out of this session, and you could use the chat area to kind of post something there as well. What I'm trying to do here actually is model in some ways that when you're in the synchronous online classroom, you might also use to get your students engaged in polling, and then asking them to comment and chat all at the same time is one way to kind of create a little bit more active learning in your classrooms as well.
Absolutely. So go ahead and use the chat panel. We're getting some answers coming in here. Thank you guys so much. I'll read a few of them as they come in, Joe.
Okay, please do. I'm not sure I'm seeing them all. Go ahead.
That's okay. Better my online teaching, improve engagement in quote live online classes. Try to refine some online courses, improve engagement again in online. Learning new tricks for teaching online. Lots of folks are doing this for the first time or doing it more for the first time. So we're hearing that quite a lot here at McGraw-Hill. Ideas and techniques. Another one on engagement, Joe. How to best deal with technology concerns. That's a new one. Interactivity with international students as well.
That's great. Just those are a lot of things we'll talk about. We'll talk about you know, what you can do in what we call the synchronous online teaching environment, where your students and you are all there at the same time, and then the asynchronous environment. And some people are in, you know, teaching in either one of those, and there's certain things you can do better in one versus the other, and we'll talk about that as a particular challenge you might face. And engagement is certainly something that that is involved in active learning. We have lots of tips and tricks around engagement and stuff as well. So I'm going to just go ahead and move through and stuff on this, and I'll take a look at this later. There's a couple places, and if you have any Q&A and you leave any questions in the Q&A area, I'll try to address those, but with the large number of people here, we may or may not be able to get to them today. But a couple of things I was going to note to you. If you want a copy of all my slides, I have already posted them on a blog that I maintain called teachthe4ps.com. Teach the four, that's the number 4, ps.com. If you want the slides right now, you can jump over there and download a PDF version of 6-up PowerPoints or something if you would like that. Most of my students always like to have their slides in advance. And once this presentation is complete, if there's any questions that weren't answered during the session, I'm going to make another blog post either over the weekend or early next week to try to answer all those questions The current blog post also lists a lot of the resources that I'll talk about here or other resources I found useful in online teaching. Let me talk for a minute about passive and active learning. Many of you, I think, probably are familiar with this. I'll share with you kind of where I'm coming at it from. And so passive learning, this is a definition that's there. And so it's really where, students are kind of, I remember one time the example being, the professor is the font of all knowledge, and all of our students are just empty vessels, and we pour our knowledge into them. And that's kind of a passive learning type of way and stuff as well, and in a way that's been used for a long time. Active learning, as you can see, engages students, and a lot of you are seeking this out, and it's what brought you today, and requires students to do meaningful activities. And we'll talk about both what are meaningful activities, and for a moment I'd like to just say, I think one of the challenges in the online space that I've read a lot of students kind of complaining about when I just read more generically online is, that there's a feeling that sometimes doing some of these active learning or engagement activities we want to do is busy work. And I'll explain a little bit. My biggest tip, and one that's been very successful to me, is explaining to students why I'm having them do various types of online activities, or when I've introduced them, for example, the SmartBook that has lots of questions in it, I have a little lecture about why they actually learn better in this format. And that's really driven down, the number of complaints about busy work type of stuff. But so they need to be meaningful activities. Students always don't see that meaningful unless you've made that connection, help them make that connection. Some other things from, again, that Prince article that was out there, and he talks about student activity and engagement. Okay, again, and particularly Prince talks about collaborative learning. And you'll see that I've been influenced a lot, and that's kind of the flip the classroom model of having students learn by interacting with one another. And so collaborative learning is one way of doing that. Another way is cooperative learning, and having some sort of structure. And what's important is, as an instructor, that we give them some sort of structure that helps them achieve a goal that we're trying to achieve. And I'll talk about that a little bit today as well. One of the things that influenced me early on, I actually took a course on an online learning platform called Coursera that maybe you've heard of before. It's one of these free online MOOC, what they call MOOCs, massive open online courses. And the presenter talked about Edgar Dale's cone of experience. And I was fascinated by this. And so you can see the traditional passive stuff, these types of learnings, and it was tracked right to a retention rate. And then, active learning, discussion groups, practicing by doing, teaching others and stuff like that as well, was associated with, a much higher average retention rate. And so I looked around online. I even emailed the professor who had presented this and stuff as well, trying to find out where is this, the empirical evidence about these retention rates. And what I found is that's a bunch of baloney. And so this retention rate stuff you see by Edgar Dale's cone of experience isn't true. And to Edgar Dale's credit, Edgar Dale never put around these retention rates and stuff along it. People had kind of built on his stuff, and it became this online sort of mythology. On the other hand, I think that most of us would agree that there's a general average retention rate in learning that is better as you move from the top of this pyramid to the bottom. And so I think we all, from our personal experience, feel that there's an opportunity also to get students' attention and engage them more. It's just this retention rate stuff that's not there. But we're going to talk more about that bottom part of that pyramid, type of things we can do. Many of you are probably also familiar with Bloom's cognitive learning objectives. And at the base level, we have remembering and understanding, and then we want our students though to be able to apply a concept. We want them to be able to do some analysis and analyze things. In marketing, you could use the example of what do we mean by market segmentation? They have to remember market segmentation, what the definition is. They have to understand what it means. Can they apply it? Can they analyze alternative market segmentation approaches? Can they evaluate them and decide which one is best? Can they create and come up with their own way of doing this? And each of these represents a higher order level of learning. And so active learning usually occurs in these top areas. And it's our ability to do that And that's really why we want to get students engaged, more than maybe just reading something or listening to a lecture, but getting them engaged gets them up to this higher level. Simultaneously, the one thing that happens is if they begin to apply these things, they can understand and remember them better as well. Although I will say that, getting them to apply, analyze, or evaluate before they understand and remember the concept. So they have to know what a market segment is before they can begin to apply it. So this also reflects something that we look at understanding and remembering, for example, as foundations that we need to establish first before we get students into active learning. So next, I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about what is a flipped class. What do I mean by a flipped class? Over the years, it's sometimes been called inverting the classroom, where things that have taken place outside the classroom now take place inside. And EDUCAUSE's definition here suggests that the typical lecture and homework elements are reversed. And there were actually two high school chemistry teachers in Colorado, Bergman and Sams, who are sometimes credited with starting the idea of flipping the classroom. And what they began to do was create short lecture videos. They took the lectures that they used to give in the classroom, they recorded those as videos, and asked the students to watch those at home. And then when the students came into class, they had them work on the homework. And the idea behind it was that students would oftentimes have questions when they were going through the homework, but then the teacher wasn't there and wasn't able to do that. And they also could do some things by having students work together. Sometimes the students that understood concepts better learned it even more when they were forced to teach another student the concept. The definition I kind of like best is this last one. I'll let you read it through there. So the educator guides, so it's a dynamic, it's interactive, and the educator has a new role. So you as a professor, when you're doing that, you move to kind of maybe individually coaching students, walking around, observing. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment here. So when we think about that last definition, that really applies to those higher level areas of Bloom's hierarchy of learning objectives. But as I mentioned earlier, we cannot get to those upper levels until we first understand and remember a concept. And usually understanding and remembering is oftentimes most efficiently accomplished through passive learning. And so through reading a textbook or having some sort of a lecture or a combination of the two, we get our students to understand these concepts best. So if we're flipping the classroom, we can think, where it fits into this passive and active learning continuum. But we can also look at it on a basis of whether we're inside the class or outside the class. Now, in a traditional classroom, we think about this as outside the class, we have students maybe read a textbook. Maybe they would do Connect Interactive. If you're a McGraw-Hill user, you're familiar maybe with the idea of using Connect Interactives. Those are online exercises students can do to reinforce their reading. And you might have a group activity they do or a project or something that they do as well. And typically that occurs outside the class, and then inside the class might be lecture. And that would be maybe one model at one extreme. And what I've done a little bit with my online classes, the first thing I've done is I created some video lectures, which, by the way, I recommend using this outside tool I've used is called PlayPosit. After students read, they're asked questions. And so that's one of the things that also McGraw-Hill's SmartBook does, is by asking students questions about what their reading was. It helps to reinforce things. It takes something that went from short-term memory, and by being forced to answer a question about it, it helps place that knowledge into long-term memory. That's really good for, again, making sure when I was flipping the classroom, I always had SmartBook assignments due before class, so that when they came to class and they were actually going to do my in-class activities that I had designed for the day, I knew they already had a good understanding and remembering of what the concept was, and they were better prepared to apply it. In addition, then in class, I would use the collaborative learning, cooperative learning, students working with each other And I've designed a series of in-class activities that I work that are directly related to the concepts that I wanted to accomplish that day. I'm curious, how many of you used the McGraw-Hill SmartBook in one of your classes? And hopefully Nicole is going to engage that. Nicole, you there? And
yeah, the poll is open, Jill.
And there it is. It's
there you go.
Side. I moved it over before.
While folks are answering, Jill, I have a couple questions from chat. You might be able to answer quickly.
Sure.
One of them is someone asked if you record the classroom sessions when you're doing online.
I do not, because I've not been doing things synchronously. So when you're doing things synchronously, I certainly would recommend that. And one of the reasons I recommend it is, especially in this time now where we have a lot of students who they didn't really sign up and plan on being in an online class. And in a few minutes, we'll talk about one of the challenges in this pandemic induced, not only what many of you experienced in the spring semester, but maybe what you'll experience in the fall where you'll start out face-to-face and get things shifted. So students aren't necessarily expecting that. So it's not always, well, yes, they did have, planned to take your class Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 o'clock. Maybe when they're back home or doing something different, it might not be as easy for them to attend at that time. So I do think recording the class is a great idea.
Great. Okay, I'm going to close the poll here. So while I do that, it takes a couple seconds, or gives people 20 seconds to go ahead and put their responses in if you haven't done that. And then I'll share the results from the group, Joe. But another question that if you don't want to answer it now, but maybe want to work it in, is someone else asked about what percentage of students actually do the pre-work.
That's the great thing. If you put some points behind your SmartBook assignments, or you need to hold students accountable. I'd say I had about 95% of students, at least, with SmartBook, you can't be guaranteed that the students actually read it. You can only be guaranteed that the students answered the questions. The nice thing about the adaptive learning process used with McGraw-Hill SmartBook is, and as I explained to my students, is that if you get the questions right the first time, you won't have to answer as many questions. So do your reading and then reinforce it with the questions. And then I think I put it together the way in my classes I've done is I think I typically assign 17 chapters, and I would tell students that they could do the top, that I would take their top 15 scores. And I would also grade them. I graded them on completion. And so as long as they finished 100% of the SmartBook assigned questions, they got the full 10 points for the day, let's say. I also had a way just to keep them from kind of saying, hey, I've already done, my 15, I'm not going to do the last 2. I gave them a little bonus points if they did all 17 of the chapters. So that's a trick I used, and I did get a very high percentage there. And it looks like, yeah, a lot of people have used SmartBook, but a fair amount haven't. And so I encourage you to take a look at it if you have not looked at it in the past. For me, it comes in real handy because I do think it's really important if you're going to do more student engagement, and we're going to try to get a lot of that active learning going on in the classroom, that the students come in already understanding the concepts that you're trying to teach.
Yeah, Joe, and some folks have had some good comments about dropping the lowest score to help. I know I hear that tactic quite a bit. And someone else mentioned that their school's using Microsoft Teams, so that the sessions are scheduled sessions rather are recorded, and then the students can go back and listen. So thanks for those comments, everyone.
Yeah, that's a great way to do things, and I think from everything I've been reading, and I kind of forget this, maybe coming from a more our students I think are generally pretty well off, but then you read a lot of stories. I remember reading stories online about how there were students having to drive to the university, to schools, their school's parking lot, because they don't have internet access at home, or they have very slow internet access. And so in order to even get on and to look at videos, they would be in the parking lot of their schools. And so you forget about a lot of the challenges faced. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we move ahead. So anyway, when I think about my flipped class, the first thing I do, they need to have that knowledge acquisition. So that is, I need that 95% of students or more to show up ready. And then I hold them accountable for it, that they are ready for it. And whoops, sorry about that. Whoop, going the wrong way here. I use the McGraw-Hill SmartBook. McGraw-Hill has some interactive exercises they can do online, which also allows them an opportunity to engage with the material a little bit more. And as I mentioned earlier, I use PlayPosit to add questions to my video lectures. And so all of them are ways to kind of hold the students a little bit more accountable and make sure they show up knowing what happens. Application I'm going to talk about a lot. And so I'm going to kind of jump over that, what I do in the classroom stuff. And then for reinforcement and assessment, I've typically used multiple choice exams because I have large classrooms and I have a lot of students in my classrooms, and just grading them all would be a little bit more difficult. So I've held them accountable with that. I did want to put in a plug for, I have not used Proctorio. Proctorio McGraw-Hill just went into a partnership with, but I have used online proctoring as a way to deal with my classes. And so it can work quite well to have your students, your online students, have a proctored exam. The great thing, having used another service for this, is McGraw-Hill has kind of built Proctorio into, and there's actually what I'd call a free version, or at least no additional cost if they're using a McGraw-Hill textbook. And maybe Nicole can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that's for what, copyrights 2020 and 2021 and 2020 and beyond. Is that right, Nicole?
2019. 2019. Uh-huh.
Okay. So you can use those. So I think that would be a lower cost alternative for many of you as a way of doing it. And you might also consider other forms of assessment, particularly in this particular time. But we're mostly going to talk about application. And so if we think about our traditional classroom, the instructor is kind of the sage on the stage, is a model used. And that's what I was saying a little bit earlier, is my idea that, we pour our knowledge into our students as they sit in rows in the classroom. And boom, we hope that light bulb goes on and we pass on that light to them. Let me show you a little bit of how that I look at that as different in my flipped classroom. And so this is my face-to-face classroom, and I'll switch to online in a moment. But when I do my flipped classroom, I've got my students around there. They're actually in small groups, and I have them working together. And so they're discussing the content and the activity that I have set up for them. And then my role completely switches. One of the things I do is I observe and I see, are they getting it? Is a light bulb going on with them? Or are they misunderstanding part of the concept? And so if they're misunderstanding it, I might, begin to do some things. This particular group here, they didn't get the light bulb, so I talk to them about it. And I become the guide on the side. I give them a little bit more information and stuff as well. Sometimes in my observations, I run around and find, a lot of the students are not getting a particular part of that concept. And then I will have, something that might be a bigger lecture, and I'll talk to the whole class. Or when I stand up in front of the class, I might say, hey, group one over there, what do you, what did you think of the answer to the first problem was? And then in group two, what did you think of something else? And by the way, a trick I used a lot of times with the face-to-face flipped classroom was I randomly assigned them to groups. I had a deck of playing cards, and when the students walked into the room, I just handed them a playing card, and they had to go sit in an area where I had put a small table tent there to say, okay, the aces sit at this table, and the deuces sit over here, and the threes over here, and stuff like that. And so they'd kind of randomly be there. It also gave me this opportunity to kind of call on tables to do things. I typically had students work in groups of 2 to 4 on particular assignments. But now, how do we take this? Okay, yeah, you're all saying we're here for online stuff, Joe. We're not for that. But I wanted to show you some of the core of what I think is key to learning in this flipped classroom. It is getting student-to-student engagement, and it's an adaptation of the instructor's role and how I see that changing. So our key elements: engage on that concept. I get to observe. I'm the guide on the side, both to individual groups and to online classes. So challenges now in the pandemic-induced online classroom. Well, one of the things I think you all have to consider is, how good a support staff do you have? And I'm sure there's a high amount of variance across your individual institutions and departments and colleges. But don't overcommit if you don't have the support staff that you might need. You also have to think about the technology that you have. what's available to you. What's your learning management system? Are you using Zoom? Are you using Teams? Somebody mentioned Teams earlier. And so what are the limitations of this and what are the opportunities? And how comfortable are you using any of these types of things? I think we have some advantage. The students, are okay with you kind of experimenting with things. They were probably more okay with it in the spring because we were all thrown into online very suddenly. But take a look at some of those things there as well. As I did some research looking at some of this stuff, like I bumped into this SAMR model of how technology and teaching can be used. And sometimes teaching can be used as a substitute. And so, reading a book online, if you've got an ebook, that's an example of technology substituting for something. If some of you in the fall are going to start in a face-to-face classroom and switch to online, you might want to think about what kinds of things can I easily substitute? How can I make sure I design something for face-to-face that'll easily substitute or maybe be augmented? Augmentation, here technology is being used, like SmartBook adds questions and adaptive learning. Might also modify things. So some of you said, you could record your lectures, or you could record office hours and share them with all students. So maybe only 5 students can come to office hours, but you could record those and post those. And then you might even do some things that are redefining. Each of these is a higher level of technology use, and your ability to use it and apply it, probably depends on your comfort level. And I suggest, starting small and then, commit to doing a little more each time. Might also use delivery mode. And I'm going to ask you to take a poll here. And I think if we've set up this poll correctly, you should be able to answer more than one. But, some of you what are you planning for the fall? Are you going to be teaching face-to-face? Synchronous online, meaning your students are there at the same time you are when you're online, or asynchronous online, which means you're recording material and they're going to be there at a different time. They're not going to be there at the same time as you are, or both asynchronous and synchronous. I think a lot of people, especially in the spring, ended up, as somebody mentioned earlier, some of their students could show up at that particular time when class was, but many weren't, so you would record that for them. The hybrid classroom, as I mentioned, which is kind of a half online, half face-to-face. We're exploring the idea here at CSU. I don't know, this is one of the ideas we're considering, is what we call rolling attendance. So in order to make social distancing work in the face-to-face classroom, we might only be able to have a quarter of the students who are signed up for the class appear face-to-face, the other 3/4 not, and then we would rotate them. So a student might only attend every 4th day, but of course the other 3/4 of the students need to get that content as well. Face-to-face with possible short notice switch to online. And probably all of us who click on A have to be ready for G, depending on what happens with the virus and in their community in the fall. So I see Nicole's popped up the polling question. How are we doing there, Nicole? We seem to have most people popped in some answers there for us.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and if you have an answer, go ahead and get those in. You'll have 20 additional seconds to go ahead and answer. I wanted to also make you aware of a couple things in chat. I went ahead and put a link to the blog. So Joe is going to be posting a lot of the answers to the questions I'm seeing coming into in chat today. We'll post like a Q&A there on that blog URL. So you'll be able to find answers if we don't get to all of those today. You'll have access to his deck, etc. So go ahead and check that out. And somebody else also said, asked if we were going to offer a certificate for completion. And the answer is yes, you can get that if you would like. I put my email address in there, so just email me and I can send that back to you. So are you guys seeing the poll results, Joe? You should be seeing them.
I am seeing them, and I see everybody's all over the map. And
exactly.
Probably
right.
that's going to be the challenge that's here. And by the way, I was going to say, Play Posit is not related to McGraw-Hill or Connect. And so I think Barry asked a question about, does it interact with, it will interact and interface very much with your learning management system. So it should work with any learning management system, meaning they answer the questions and it will populate their scores right on for the students there, but it's not part of McGraw-Hill.
Great. And Joe, we're at the 15-minute remaining mark, just FYI, okay?
Okay. I was watching the time and saw that I, as usual, fell a little behind. So I might move through a little more quickly. Another thing you have to consider as you do things is class size. It's a lot different doing a lot of this online teaching if you have 20 students versus 100 students. And then finally thinking about the learning objectives. In a survey course or an intro to marketing course, then you might have a lot more questions that are lower on Bloom's hierarchy of learning. But if you're in a more advanced or elective course, you might have many more higher expectation of being higher level and needing those more active learning. Finally, another thing we have to think about is the challenges that our students are facing. Many are struggling with this time, especially with everything that's going on and in their family situations. And I think being sensitive to that, many of them are forced home and they may or may not have a place to study and do some of this engagement, or it might not be easy for them or have to care for different people. And then just even the technology or internet availability they have to deal with some of these things. And you'll have to make that assessment with all your own students and stuff as well. Okay, the online classroom. At a minimum, can we find ways to get students to engage more with the material? And I'll explain some things there and get students to apply those concepts. Can we do those types of things? And then in greater yet, we'd hope that they might seek opportunities to foster greater learner-to-learner interaction. And so, as I said, in my flipped classrooms, that's where it really helped, was having learners with each other. And then also, are there opportunities for you to observe and be that guide on the side? And I'm going to explain some ways you could do that as well. And where am I now? One of the things, many of you, I'm only going to quickly go through McGraw-Hill SmartBook, but we'll have a link online where you can kind of connect more. But I've mentioned SmartBook already. In marketing, we have a variety of video concepts which you can use. They have some built-in multiple choice questions. The I See It videos are a great way to kind of get students to understand a concept with these short videos that are typically 2 to 3 minutes long. And they get to see it applied in a context. And you can also add those. We have them usually built into Connect Interactives where they can answer multiple choice questions, but you can also post those into a discussion board on your own if you want your students to talk about them and provide more text. There's video cases. Marketing analytics is important. We have marketing plan prep exercises. One of the new things in McGraw-Hill is the marketing mini sims. This is a mini simulation. I'll talk in a minute about a concept called scaffolding, where this works really well in there. They kind of have this simulation to be design and market backpacks. And you can have them do small little exercises which build to something at the end of the semester where they do the entire simulation. That's something I've done. Another new thing is some role-playing simulations where students get, again, they answer questions as they go along and read some things. It's a really neat way to learn some stuff. A new one coming out shortly is Writing Assignments Plus as well. Oh, and then we also have our marketing Principles of Marketing video library as a place to get some videos. So lots of stuff there. These are great to add when you have limited time, if you have large classes, and especially if learning is asynchronous. And the reason why is that all of these things can happen behind the scenes. You assign these to your students, they're automatically graded, and automatically the grades are populated into your learning management system. So for those of you, who are having discussion boards or things with large classes, those are going to create a lot of problems. The McGraw-Hill SmartBook and Connect works particularly well. Nicole made this great little chart here and shows how some of these fit onto some of the things we've talked about earlier on Bloom's hierarchy of learning. And also, I asked Nicole, since many of you are not from marketing, here are some of the places the application-based activities also reside if you're in some of these other disciplines. So they're not just available in marketing. Also, some of the things available in my textbook, and I think these exact elements aren't in every textbook, but most textbooks have something like this. And so just in one textbook, and even though my textbook has a tendency to emphasize active learning because of my background, these are all the different types of things that are elements within particular chapters where you might be able to take some of that in and post it on a discussion board and have students interact with it as opposed to just reading about it. There's also within an instructor's manual an opportunity to talk about how that would all fit. So most Connect Interactives can add a discussion, so the things I mentioned earlier could add a critical thinking or discussion element as well. These tend to work best if you have more time, you have smaller class sizes. Learning can be asynchronous and you can put it in a discussion board for you, or if it's synchronous and you can use breakout rooms. I know Zoom, for example, I haven't done this yet, but I've read about some people who are having great experiences using breakout rooms in Zoom. And I believe Teams also has this capability in a chat format. They're working on a video format from what I understand. And so, getting your students to break out into small groups and discuss it, that's exactly what I do in my flipped classroom, and I'm looking forward to doing it this fall. Yeah, increasing now, we talk about that learner-to-learner interaction. If you can do discussion boards, students, one of the things I've found where discussion boards are working particularly well is you can set in Canvas anyway, and I think many learning management systems, you can set it so that students can't see other students' answers until they make a post. That gets over the complaints that, oh, somebody else is, all the other students have answered this question, there's not much to do. I also require students to engage with other students' posts. You can do group projects and assignments. As I mentioned there, you might want to have a do it on your own option for people here, just because, again, because of this pandemic situation and the challenges. As I mentioned, Zoom does this as well there. We also want to be able to increase in student to instructor. So where can we get that observed? Well, one of the important things if you set up discussion boards is that you routinely go in and engage in the discussion boards and try to make yourself obvious. If you're going to look at what happens in the discussion board, make some comments in there and see what you can do. Also make a set of larger comments. If you create a discussion board at the end, maybe even in a short video, things I observed in here was this, and here are some of the highlights that happened. Mentioned earlier, holding video office hours and then recording them and posting them to your students to offer them that flexibility. So some other sample things, I think using online polling is a great way. Be visibly online, as I mentioned earlier. Design the flip for fostering those student-to-student and instructor-to-student interactions. Scaffolding lessons and the course. So scaffolding, some of these theories, I'm gonna breeze through these theories quickly, but if you go to teach4ps.com and download my ebook that I've created called Flip Your Marketing Classroom, and even for you people not into marketing, there's a theory chapter in there, and it talks about things like scaffolding, which is kind of making sure you build a foundation on which students can learn. Gradually move them up, as I mentioned earlier, in Bloom's hierarchy, or as I mentioned earlier, starting with mini sims and moving to full. You can also scaffold your course as you begin to make some of the active learning more complicated as time goes on.
Hey, Joan, just to interrupt, we're really close on time. So I just want to remind folks that we'll put this deck and the recording on that blog site Joe's mentioned. So thank you for attending, but just wanted to make you aware of that in case anybody has to run.
Thank you, Nicole. One of the things also, if you do have to create content and videos, is to chunk them. Find ways to make your videos, lectures 5 to 10 minutes long instead of trying to record that 75 minutes. It's a lot harder to watch a video for a long time of somebody lecturing than it is in the classroom. So chunking is a great thing that you want to do as well. Another thing that we found helpful in our online classes is elaboration. And the elaboration is, again, giving material by expressing it in your own words or connecting it with what you already know, or constructing your own knowledge for yourselves. And these are a couple other theories in education. And what we've done in our online classes is we ask, for example, what are 2 concepts from this chapter that you observed or which apply to your life, and provide clear examples. And so it's fairly easy in marketing. It may or may not be as easy in some of your other disciplines, but in marketing, students are, they're buying things, they're acting as customers. And so we have students interact this way, and getting them to use and see how it applies to their own concepts is very useful. Ask for your input. Do you have any favorite active learning suggestions? And so if you can, just go ahead and put those in the sidebar. What Nicole is able to do for me is she's going to collect all those comments in the sidebar. So if you have any suggestions of things that you're using, and I'm going to gather all those, and that'll go in my blog post that I will put up after this class session. So you can comment on anything that you are using or you find works particularly well, and I will put that into the blog so everybody can read that later. And so thank you for that input. Because I'm running a little bit behind time here, and Nicole might say you're running a lot behind time, I'll give some parting thoughts. So when you're designing, don't forget your course learning objectives. When you're online, consider maybe cutting back on content. Oftentimes you need to cut back a little bit on the amount of content. As I said, scaffold Recognize your own limitations and recognize your students' constraints. That's why I shared some of those earlier. I liked a concept, that Nicole talked to me about. She said she likes to think about it as small, frequent meals for assignments, kind of pacing those a few each week or something like that to keep students moving along. When implementing, I found good luck. I mentioned this earlier, explaining to students why they have these different assignments. If you see my ebook on my blog, you'll get some of the good why answers there. In this pandemic time, you might be a little more flexible with due dates and expectations. Foster feedback so you can listen and adapt. This is a new space for us. You're probably not adapting as much when you've been teaching for 20 years. You know what's working and not working. And finally, some resources here. I've made some blog posts over there at teachthefourps.com. Also, feel free. I highlighted this one in blue. This is something that almost always happens to me as I get ready to make a presentation. I think of something I should have added. On the slides I've posted on Teach the 4Ps, I do not have my email address, so I highlighted that in blue. Feel free to reach out directly to me if you think I can be of any help to you particularly. And because I think I'm running right up on time, Nicole, do you think I keep posting questions, and I promise I will answer them as the best I can on teachthefourps.com. And I think, unless Nicole has a particular question she wants to ask me, I was just going to say.
No, I don't. There's some great questions, Joe, in the chat. Just want to remind everybody, we also have the email address that you use to register for this session. So we can send out via email the recording as well. And then I'll include a link to Joe's blog where he'll have this deck, the recording, as well as the Q&A. I have copied the chat, so I'll be able to send those to Joe for his input. And thank you so much. You guys have been very, very engaged. We're really grateful. And we hope you have a great and safe and fun holiday weekend, long weekend. And thank you again. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you all for coming. Have a great day. Have a good weekend.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.